Okay, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Tuesday night's seminar. We are looking at the latest in the conflict avoidance process. I will shortly be handing over to Martin Burns from RICS to introduce his esteemed panel this evening. But just a reminder, if you have any questions for our panel, please use the Q&A or the chat tools in the bottom toolbar to ask those, and the panel will be happy to answer those for you later in the session. So, Martin, I will hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Julian, and welcome everybody to this second webinar on conflict avoidance. In this session, we're looking at conflict avoidance in action, in the sense that we're going to be talking to Mohammed Haque and Mark Entwistle about how conflict avoidance actually works and how effective it can be. Mark Entwistle is going to really bring this home to us because he's actually acted as a third-party neutral in conflict avoidance programs on a number of occasions, and to my mind with some great success, being very effective. And these are the kind of subject areas we're going to talk about. I'm going to go straight into this, in fact, unless Mark has anything else he wants to say about that, and just find out who Mark is and why we need to be listening to him today. Mark, can you tell us a bit about your background, just to start off
Thank you, Martin. Can I just say how disconcerted I was to see that the second question on the programme was, who is Mark Entwistle? And I thought somebody, bearing in mind my advanced age, knew something that I didn't know about whether I still recognise myself or realise who I am. But I take no offence at that. Yeah, just a brief introduction, and perhaps on the way through that couple of minutes, make some observations about our industry, the construction and engineering industry, in which I've been active since 1973, 48 years now. And I go back to the time in the UK when there was talk of nationalisation of the construction industry. And that really caused a fur to fly in the industry in the UK, on the basis that it would cut through the competition. It would mean that there were closed shops and things of that sort. People very much set their faces against it. And I found myself thinking at the time, I'm not quite sure anybody's really thinking about this, about what it is the industry needs. In those days, I was a contractor's quantity surveyor. And I stuck at that for about 8 years, something of that sort. And it was quite clear to me that in every aspect of construction, there was an industry going on within an industry. And that was the conflicts industry. And as a QS, of course, my task was to fight the corner for my contractor employer and get as much as I could out of the account on any project that I was involved in. And that seemed to work pretty amicably, I have to say. But behind it all, there were mechanisms for dealing with disputes which arose, and they arose frequently. Back in those days, we didn't have adjudication, of course. We had arbitration, and a lot of disputes went to arbitration or to court if there were no arbitration clause. And the whole industry was adversarial. And that stepped down from the employer-contractor relationship into the supply chain as well. Well, in the fullness of time, I decided that there must be a better way of dealing with these issues within the industry, because it was so counterproductive. It was so undermining of the efficiency of the industry and so costly that I moved my career then into the more legal side of things, as many QSs have done. I joined a firm by the name of James R. Knowles and was with them for 15 years. They specialized in disputes. There are other practices around, that were around at the time, that did the very same thing. All they did was represent parties in disputes, and it was a big industry. And it became increasingly apparent that other ways of resolving these things were bound to be attractive to the industry if the industry could change its mindset. And so, having been called to the bar in 1997 and commenced my own practice in 2000, that's now developed into 100% tribunal work, and increasingly in recent years in the field of dispute avoidance rather than resolution. That's where I now am. I practice mostly in dispute board work internationally, in CAP work, as Martin's already alluded to, and in international arbitration, which of course is a fixture in the firmament as far as dispute resolution is concerned. And I don't see that changing anytime soon, frankly. So that's a snapshot of where I am and what I've seen of the industry in the manner in which it's changed in that 48 years that I've been involved. There is much more an appetite these days, I find, for parties to resolve things themselves with assistance if they can. There was always the possibility that there would be a negotiated settlement to things back in the early days even. But negotiated settlement basically meant the party with the bigger stick beat up the party with a smaller stick, and they just had to lump what the response was. And the attitude tended to be, you don't like it, don't work for us again, which is hardly conducive to good working and commercial relationships. So this is topical. The series of webinars that have been presented here are topical and increasing in interest. And I'll be interested to talk to you a bit later on as to my experiences as to how things have begun to move and the ground there is still to traverse before I think the industry gets to where it needs to be.
You know, Mark, just listening to you speak there, it suddenly came to my mind an interesting, though for me, a particularly scaring statistic is that I've known you for about 30 years. And,
that is scary.
That is scary. Scary for me. And, you know, in that time, of course, I've got to know you. And you've been an enormous help to not just me personally, but also RSCS. In the fact that I followed your lead and also trained and was called to the bar in order to, I think, progress a career, which was very much about helping people to resolve disputes better than they had done. And I think it was for that reason that, you know, the fact that I knew you, that I respected you, that I'd kind of followed a path that you were leading, that I asked you to help me when I was called to a meeting with Transport for London and some of its main contractors back in 2015, 2016. And from there, it led to the development of the conflict avoidance process that TfL ultimately baked into its programme of works and contracts for the refurbishment of the London Underground. And also as a consequence of that, you were the first person to be appointed to act as a cap neutral to try and resolve issues between TfL and one of its contractors. It was a different dynamic than acting as an arbitrator or an adjudicator. And I think it'd be really useful for this audience here to hear a little bit about your experiences and the challenges that role entailed.
Yes, I mean, it was a different dynamic and is a different dynamic. Back in those early days, of course, there was almost a leap of faith by the parties that they wished to try something which was completely new at the time to resolve conflicts or potential conflicts before they developed into full-blown disputes. And it's a tribute, I believe, to TfL especially, but also their tier one contractors, because a lot of them signed up to this, obviously led by the employer's initiative. And my experience was that some were more amenable to it than others, understandably. It was entirely new, and you would understand why some contractors might be a little bit skeptical or uncertain about how it was going to pan out. But I believe the timing was important as well, because the development of construction contracts had for some years embedded procedures which encouraged the parties to be cooperative. And I think particularly the NEC suite of contracts, for example. Is it clause 11? Mo, you'll be able to tell me that. I always thought the NEC contract was obviously drafted by a quantity surveyor because the first clause was number 11. And what that said is the parties shall undertake to operate with mutual trust and cooperation. Well, I haven't got a clue what that means. And I don't think the parties had as well, but it sent a message. And the message was, here is a contract which expects the parties will do what they can to adopt a cooperative approach to the project. Now, I don't think anything much happened as far as the NEC was concerned in the years between the first time we saw it and into the 2000s, partly because I think at that time, and maybe still today to some degree, it's virtually impenetrable in terms of procedures. It's certainly my humble opinion. But I think parties have been led into this notion that there is a different way to deal with conflict. And what I found in the very first experience I had with the CAP process was that I brought to it the approach that I had been taking in international contracts for some years previously, as far as dispute boards was concerned. And to a degree, I think the CAP process is a refinement of the dispute board arrangement, which one finds typically in FIDIC contracts and in others. I mean, even our domestic contracts are now being adapted to utilize dispute boards. And the very notion of that was to say that there should be then embedded in the contract arrangements for a project someone who is independent and impartial and has no interest other than seeing the project be successful, whatever that means. Independent of both parties and encouraging the parties to look forward and to avoid disputes. That's the very nature of what dispute boards are about. Sadly, my experience is that's still a rarity these days. In the international arena, parties very often wait until a dispute arises and then appoint a dispute board, and they lose all the possible benefit of dispute avoidance from this neutral person becoming embedded in the contract machinery. And that's what CAP has developed. And it's a tribute, as I say, to TfL, that they recognize the benefit of that and embed these things, these processes now into their contracts and have signed up by their tier one contractors. And the difference, I was fortunate, I think, in as much as I'd had a background in dispute board work, and this is what I brought to bear to the CAP process. And that is to sit between the parties, but be part of the contract machinery. And to inculcate in the parties a relationship of cooperation between them, which would involve dealing with problems, present day problems, in a collaborative fashion, but also be far-sighted enough to look ahead and foresee what future problems there may be. And as I said in my remarks a few minutes ago, this is an industry which is beset with difficulties. That will never change. There are so many uncertainties within our industry. I always say, when people say to me, oh, the construction industry is the most unpredictable industry there is, I say, no, it's not for a minute. It's the most predictable industry there is, because there are so many unpredictable things you know are going to turn up. And that's the world we inhabit. You guys listening to this now will testify to that, I've no doubt, that we have to deal with unpredictable circumstances in the domestic or in the international arena. They vary, of course, but we have to deal with things that we can't control. And that's what the CAP process does. One further point to make before I go any further, the CAP appointee, as the DAB appointee, of course, is stuck with what the party's contract says. You don't have any input into what the contract might introduce by way of machinery to avoid conflict and dispute. You're stuck with what it is, but you work within it, and the process then becomes one which is not so much adversarial as collaborative. And that's what I've tended to bring to bear where I can. And certainly that was the case in the first appointment I had through the CAP process.
You know, Mark, I think there's something in Alice in Wonderland about predictability. There's got to be, you know, it certainly sounds like a line out of that or the Jabberwocky. Yeah. Just as a follow-up to that, I hear what you say about you know, this kind of similarity between the function of a dispute board and the function of CAP. But I think there's also, worthwhile pointing to some distinctions. And part of that came about because when we first started to have a conversation with TfL and the contractors about dispute boards, the standing dispute board model, we got immediate pushback on that, didn't we? And
yes.
What we did, we come up with a hybrid. And I think the hybrid is something that is part dispute board, part mediation, part early neutral evaluation, part adjudication in some ways as well, except decisions are never binding.
And that's exactly right. I mean, for me, the unique feature of the CAP process is that it is perhaps at different times a combination of those various things. And the one thing I think which can be said with absolute certainty about the CAP process, no matter how it's embedded in the party's contract, and that is there is no rule book. That the CAP professional who's appointed works with the procedures that are within the contract, but sees that as a mechanism by which it can be developed according to the needs of the project and the needs of the particular issues that the parties have brought. And that, of course, means an open-minded approach, not just by the CAP professional, but also by the parties themselves. And there's, of course, where an issue can emerge.
That's very interesting because, again, as an aside, a month or so ago, I attended a meeting of the Society of Construction Arbitrators. Lots of people I know there, and there were 5 people there who had at some point or other acted as a CAP neutral on various matters. And we had a conversation a bit like this one, with a number of people. And what was very interesting and what we learned is that the CAP process had never been utilized exactly the same way in any particular case.
Yep, I can believe that.
Each one of the 5 people who had acted as a CAP professional, and they were a mix of lawyers and QSs, and of course people like you who are both. And in each case, they adopted a procedure that lent itself to the matter in hand, the parties' priorities and what they needed, and the complexity of the beast that they had to deal with.
Yeah.
And that was fantastic. And what effectively they did in every single case that was similar is that they applied their own personal expertise to give both sides an answer to a question that they were grappling with. Now, it may be that in some cases, one or both parties didn't like that answer, but what it gave them was a platform then to continue their own negotiation so that the matter they had didn't escalate to an adversarial procedure like adjudication or arbitration or indeed litigation. Then that brings me very nicely, I think, to looking at that level of complexity and skills and knowledge and experience that these people have in yourself. What do you think are the kind of core skills and qualities that you as a professional need to act as an effective CAP neutral?
I suppose you start with the basic building blocks, and the building blocks are going to be, of course, since you're embroiled in issues between the parties which arise out of a contract, there needs to be some expertise in that particular contract and contracts within the construction and engineering generally, and so a background of dealing with these things and understanding of what individual contracts mean is one of the essential building blocks, of course. And then beyond that, the second building block will be, of course, professional expertise in the area in which this potential conflict is likely to take place. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm expert in every subject within the construction industry. Nobody would believe me if I did. But the breadth of experience which people have does open them up to experience of different types of issues, different types of disputes in the past, different technical issues, and so on. And so that breadth of experience, I think, is another essential building block. But that's where I think I stop and where we depart now from what you might say are the essential qualities needed of an arbitrator or a litigator or a TCC judge or whatever. And what we move into are the softer issues. We move into perhaps the more ephemeral elements of a person's background and understanding and personality. and attitude. And for me, one of the key things about the CAP process, reflected somewhat in dispute boards as well, is the need to be flexible, the need to realize that this won't work unless both parties are on side with it. And that means being sensitive to the concerns that one or other party has, and trying to address them, hopefully in a subtle way, but maybe in a more direct way if it were necessary. And to recognize, I think, what I've always said in my time in the industry, and that is we are a people business. This industry is a people industry. And for all those who get involved in the more formal dispute side of things see the technicalities. It wearies me sometimes to hear people argue these technical points, losing sight of the fact that we are a people business. We have to deal with people, and the people who are on either side of an issue or of a difference have their own concerns. They have personal concerns as well as their corporate concerns. And recognizing that and trying to put together then a panoply of procedures and mechanisms for addressing issues so that both parties buy into it and recognize that there is something beneficial to the project out of this, not just their own vested interest, but to the project generally. I think it is one of the softer skills that a person in this capacity needs.
Do you know, I can agree with you more, Mark. And I trained as a mediator of an organisation called CEDA. And what I came to learn very quickly is that those soft skills you talked about, it's all right having this immense amount of experience as a professional in a particular industry, as a quantity surveyor, as a lawyer, as an arbitrator even. But the kind of role that we're looking at in terms of CAP, I think needs what you call softer skills as well. It's an aptitude. And sometimes people don't have that. Sometimes very, very able people are not capable of discharging the kind of role that we're talking about here, which is one about helping parties to find a way through the mire to a solution to a dispute which might otherwise escalate out of control and end up, with horrendous costs and time and resource thrown at it, to the satisfaction of neither of them at the end of the day.
Indeed. I mean, for me, one of the essential differences between the CAP process and other forms of dispute resolution is that the parties start off with ownership of the issue, and the skill of the CAP appointee should be to ensure that the parties retain ownership of what the issue is. I'm struggling to think of a CAP appointment I've had where one or other of the parties was represented by a high-flying legal team, for example. It's inappropriate. For me, the first meeting with the parties is the crucial one, because generally it is the parties. I insist that it's just the parties. They may have one of their technical experts present, a QS or a planner or something of that sort, who can put flesh on the bones of what these issues are. But they're not represented in the formal way that one has come to expect in other types of dispute resolution, the more formal types, even in adjudication these days. I'm sorry to say that's just treading the same path as was the case in arbitration formally. But CAP is different. And that's not to say to the parties that the CAP professional has any power to say to the party, you will not be represented by a legal team. That's not the way to approach it at all. But to allow the parties to see that the nature of the process is one where they really should remain engaged themselves, because they're the ones who know what their ambitions are, what their drivers are. They're the people who have to work with the people on the other side of the table still. And so it becomes should remain a more connected process.
And I think what's important in how you started this last piece here was that it's one of the real benefits of a process like CAP is it leaves parties in control of the outcome. Because if you hand it over to adjudication, arbitration, or litigation, then those people who are at the commercial coalface, they then lose control over the decision. What they do maintain control of, or lose control of, is paying for it as well, because they ultimately will have to pay for it.
Yeah.
Look,
I
Mark,
mean, the other thing, Martin, while you're on that subject, it says the other thing that I think would be true to say, in my experience, this isn't anything like as expensive as other processes are. And I can testify to that from my own experience, because my bills aren't as great as they would be in international arbitration or even in adjudication. And when you factor in the fact that the parties perhaps haven't bought in high profile and costly legal teams to represent them, then there is a distinct benefit, I think.
I think you're absolutely right. In fact, TfL were very open about the fact that normal adjudications, what normal adjudication would be, they said would cost them somewhere in the region of £50,000, whereas a large adjudication would be £500,000.
Yeah.
Every time they used the cap, it averaged out at about £12,000 per cap, and that was split equally between the parties. So
yes, indeed.
in essence, each side was paying £6,000, and what they got was a resolution that they were in control of. They agreed and signed up to, which meant that, to an extent, both of them were satisfied with the outcome.
Yes.
Brings us on. I know we've only got a few more minutes of your time before we hand over to Mohammed for some further questions. And I just wanted, maybe on that point where we're getting to outcomes, is if you can perhaps give us some indication of the type of outcomes that have been achieved as a result of CAP that you have experienced.
Well, I'll talk about good and bad. A good outcome, of course, avoids the conflict. It avoids the parties going on again and fighting a battle in a more formal and adversarial fashion. And I, from memory, I think I would be right to say I don't think I've had anything other than that outcome from the CAP process that I've been involved in. And I can bring one instance to mind where the contractor involved really was not at all certain that this was something which was going to work. I won't say they were skeptical, but they were certainly uncertain about what the outcome would be. And gradually they came round, and they came round, I think, because they could see that the process could deliver something for them. This is partway through a major project, by the way. So I don't think either party really wants to fall out big time with the other in such a circumstance as that. So that was a success, that the contractor did come round, the recommendation was made, the parties accepted it. Generally speaking, what I try to do is to get the parties to agree what sort of outcome they want, and it's generally a recommendation with reasons attached to it. You say what skills are necessary. It's still necessary to be logical and reasoned and so on, as you would otherwise. But I tend to make it more user-friendly as a product than an award or a decision might be. The issues get resolved. That's another benefit, of course. But what it does on the way through, I believe, is that it encourages the establishment of a collaborative and cooperative approach between the parties themselves. There have been the odd projects where I've been brought back in, but there are equally a lot where I haven't, and where I think they haven't resorted to CAP further. They've then decided amongst themselves that they can deal with this in the manner in which the CAP process has addressed things. I think it encourages mutual trust between the parties, but that's for them to testify to rather than me. Nobody has ever said that to me. It's just my feeling about it. One of the bad outcomes was, as I say, I don't think I've had what I would regard as a bad outcome. I think there was an unfortunate outcome. You'll recall this, Martin, in Scotland a while ago, and the problem with that was that there was a dispute. There were significant and very costly issues between the parties, which rendered it difficult to overcome. But a bad outcome is the absence of a good one. It's as simple as that. CAP is something which sells itself on the basis of delivering a good outcome from the parties, whatever that amounts to. And working with the parties, I think you can get a feeling for exactly what a good outcome will be for them. And included in all of that is, of course, the resolution of this, or the avoidance of what it is we're talking about, and setting the scene for the future.
Mark, I really appreciate your time today. I think there's a lot that we've all learned from just listening to you for the last half hour and your experiences in acting in this role. And I think there's more to come. You know, we have a few more of these sessions, which I'd like personally to share with this audience, but also to bring in at some point or other people who have been on the other side of the fence to you, Mark, people who have been, you know, the parties themselves. So that would be very useful.
Yeah, I mean, can I just say, I mean, I sometimes look at myself and I think you're just a rosy-eyed optimist. You know, things aren't going to change. Things will be, a human nature being what it is, things won't change. But I don't believe that's true. I think things will change. I think things are changing, and I think things are going to have to change. We've now, certainly in the international arena, got an absolute tsunami of issues which is going to be presented to us who practice in that field, arising out of all the things projects have had to deal with as far as COVID is concerned. And there's going to be a need for a lot of dispute resolvers, first of all, but I think there's also going to be a need for a lot of dispute avoiders. And the landscape needs to, and I think it will change.
Mark, thank you very much. I know you have to go now.
I do, but thank you all very much. Can I just say goodbye to all the guys who are listening in, and I hope that's been useful to you. Do think about seriously the way our industry is going. We can all make a valuable contribution to ensuring the industry is a more efficient and pleasant place to work.
Excellent words. Now, I don't want our audience to leave, but I know you have to, Mark. We're going to carry on. Mohammed and I have got a bit of a conversation to have now. But great to see you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Mo. Thank you, Julie. I'll take my leave. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Mark, before I go into conversation with you, there's one or two things that came across in Mark's conversation that reminded me of things I ought to have perhaps said in our earlier webinar, very much around, you know, Mark looking in the mirror with rose-tinted specs and seeing, you know, things are changing. In my role at RSS, I've seen this happening. It really is happening. The change of mindset, the change of push, if you like, towards more use of conflict avoidance and early intervention and better management of relationships on contracts than has existed throughout the history of the construction sector. Mohammed, you've been around long enough to know that the construction sector has had a history of disputes and conflict, and the whole thing has often been described as set up. And indeed, Mark, right at the outset in his piece there, has mentioned how the construction sector, through his lifetime, his career in that sector, has been one of dispute and conflict. But we're seeing change, and where are we seeing that change? We're seeing support by the government in the UK in particular for conflict avoidance and early intervention. It's been formally promoted in government guidance, in the Cabinet Office guidance on responsible behaviour for contracting parties of June last year, in the construction playbook, which was published in December last year. We're seeing it in the terms of the Welsh Government's post-COVID recovery plan for the construction and engineering sector, which includes a whole raft of support for conflict avoidance and early intervention, and the conflict avoidance pledge, which we haven't really mentioned in this webinar thus far. And just last week, the Scottish Government published a policy note for the construction and engineering sector, which encourages contracting parties to sign up to the conflict avoidance pledge and to adopt conflict avoidance. So there's a momentum building here. Thus far in the conversation we've had with Mark, it's very much around his involvement in helping me and RSCS set up conflict avoidance for Transport for London. But what he didn't mention was that other organisations, and we talked about Scotland, but NHS in Scotland have adopted the CAP process into their contracts, into their frameworks going forward. And we see organisations like the Urban Growth Company who are supporting conflict avoidance, supporting the pledge, and introducing CAP techniques into their sort of frameworks, and encouraging suppliers and indeed themselves to try and avoid going down the formal route, the adversarial route, which, you know, if you listen to Mark, why would he go there? Why would he do that? Mohammed, I asked Mark at the outset of my conversation with him, so who is Mark Entwistle? But I think it might be just nice as we go into this second bit here, who's Mohammed Haque?
Right, okay. Thank you very much, Martin. I mean, first of all, I feel kind of honored and privileged to be in a session and be the part of the speakers where Mark Entwistle is, and also, of course, Martin Barnes is. But yes, I am a self-declared dispute resolution professional and trying to be a conflict avoidance advocate, so to say. I'm still not a CAP professional in that sense, that I'm doing anything for anybody. But of course, my background, I started my career as a barrister back in 1997. I was called to the bar. But even before that, I worked in a gap year in a construction law firm in Asia for 1.5 years, in a huge international construction dispute. And that's how, till today, I've been only involved or mostly involved in construction contracts at different levels, starting from procurement and obviously up to the post completion defects and then dispute resolution stages. And I rarely attended court cases, or litigations, but I've represented parties as counsel in challenge and enforcement of ADR decisions. And quite frequently, for the first 10 years of my career, I've worked as a counsel in the international construction disputes, in international arbitrations of very high value and complex, involving complex issues and all. And my involvement in adjudication is somewhat accidental, because that I want to understand construction a little bit more. So I've done a BSc in construction and then worked in a PQS firm and qualified myself. Now I'm a fellow of the Civil Engineering Institution. I've never had the opportunity or time to actually sit for the RICS exams because of my other preoccupations. Otherwise, I'd love to be a member there. But by the way, I am a member of the RICS President's main panel of adjudicators, and that's the bread and butter of me for me for last 1.5 years. But as I said, I've been in ADR right from the day one of my professional life, which is about 27 years now, and pre and post qualification as a barrister. And I always felt that it's a dynamic industry, meaning ADR in construction itself, and there are always opportunities to refine and do better. So we, on one end of the spectrum, we start with very adversarial attitude of throwing ourselves into an arena and punch each other. An umpire or referee is just around. If we go or play foul, they can just separate us, but still allowed to punch each other and either win or lose. You know, if you're a student, if you've just joined the profession and you're getting good money from it, you might enjoy this. But there are many, not everyone, but there are many I've experienced who start thinking, why fighting so much on the same and similar issue, which could be resolved and everyone knows what it is, like in a JCT contract, even if you're talking about today's time. If you have pleaded in an extension of time application, force majeure, COVID as force majeure, you are not entitled to a loss and expense. It's clearly stated into the contract. Yet the party representatives will be bound to sort of act the drama of not understanding it, or trying to find out something, an impossibility, and make it a fight out of it, and then lose or win, and then say, oh, you know what, the adjudicator doesn't understand. So, you know, he's a QS. How do you understand what this legal issue is? Or he's a lawyer. He doesn't understand EOT at all. So, end of the day, there I call myself a conflict avoidance advocate. That end of the day, we got to earn some money, that's fine, but we got to get some satisfaction out of our job as well. And as such, I prefer to call myself a conflict avoidance advocate.
I like that phrase, and in fact, I might steal it, because anything that's worth stealing is worth doing. As you know, I've known Mark Entwistle for 30 odd years. I've known you for a far shorter period of time, only a few months, but we've had a number of conversations, Mohammed, which struck me as we are very like-minded in our view in terms of how the industry should move forward in terms of the way it handles and manages conflicts and disputes. And just listening to you there, it's evident that you very much behind this whole initiative of pushing procedures like CAP forward. But with all that experience in your background, you know, qualifying as a barrister, you know, barristers are trained litigators, qualifying as an adjudicator with RSES. So yes, you're on the president's panel of adjudicators at RSES, and of course, adjudication is, I want to hold my hands up, by the way, and say, I am a fan of adjudication, because I think it does have a place in the spectrum of how disputes ought to be resolved and managed, and it has proven to be immensely successful over the years. My position is that I don't think that once people have fallen out, they should automatically refer a matter to adjudication. They ought to be thinking about what can we do in order to avoid that. But if it's unavoidable, then it's a method that's going to help us to resolve those issues. And bearing all of that in mind, you know, I'd be interested to hear from you, and hopefully the audience too, about what you think that procedures like CAP and conflict avoidance generally can accomplish that adjudication can't.
Very good question, actually, Martin, because, and it's my approach to it is, I would explain or try to explain the difference between dispute resolution and conflict avoidance. I mean, I've touched upon this in our last webinar as well, that conflict avoidance tries to allow intervention early and manage the dispute so that it doesn't escalate up to the level of conflict. The problem with conflict is, I mean, my personal view is disputes are inevitable in construction contracts, and it's a good thing to occur because it gives us a chance to revisit our thoughts over a contract and allows us to understand what our obligations and rights are. But to allow it to escalate and become a conflict and a deal breaker and destroying the relationships is the downside of it, the dispute resolution. But if we can pick up the dispute early and then put it into a CAP procedure, what we achieve is we get both the parties, they get a very neutral view from a very highly specialized professional into the industry. So that actually allows them to assess their position very realistically. It may not be binding, it doesn't have to be. The parties may still go to an adjudication. But the advantage of CAP is that parties then can reassess and then can see certain things which are not been picked up by their own partisan attitude. So the CAP, it allows or sometimes restore relationships, and adjudication, by the time it goes to that stage, it's like a final call that once the adjudication is over, it's highly unlikely that parties will work together again. And to me, it's very important, at least at the moment, because we are coming out of COVID and we'll have a range of disputes because of this COVID situation, not only the COVID, post-Brexit as well. And definitely the industry will be facing the pressure of material shortage, labor shortage, and so many other problems we are going to face in short, and insolvency as well, because many companies, the smaller contractors, will go burst because of this COVID pressure and all of these things. And we'll be setting ourselves into a scenario where there will be so many disputes. Now, choices are very clear. We keep on adjudicating 1, 2, 3. At the moment, within last 3 weeks, I have been referred to by RICS in adjudication, 4 adjudications between the same parties. It's because, you know, they have just restarted and they found that there are so many issues. Now, I was thinking that if CAP was been the chosen method, if someone like Mark would have sat with the parties and said, look, okay, these are the issues, this is what the contract says, now choice is yours whether you want to fight or continue to fight or, you know, find a way. So that's what I think the main difference is. One is allowing us to retain our relationship, that's CAP, and reassessing our position from a neutral perspective, getting an opinion from a neutral person. The other is working as an all or nothing fashion, that there is a red light, that's it. We don't have any relationship anymore.
I think you've made some excellent points there, Mohammed, and this certainly comes across in conversations I've had with others and people who've acted as CAP professionals, but also talking to parties who've used it. And hopefully in the future we'll have a webinar where we can bring people in who be able to get that perspective. That, you know, the things that CAP can accomplish that, you know, adjudication and indeed arbitration litigation can't, is at the heart of it is maintaining that relationship first and foremost. You know, we've talked about the fact that CAP is immensely cheaper than going through adjudication, but cost is not always measured in money. You know, it's a cost to the relationship, the commercial relationship between parties that can be severely damaged as a result of conflict and disputes. It's a cost to brand reputation. You know, that's something that also people have talked to me about, that they don't want a reputation as an organisation that's constantly ending up in disputes and adjudications. Oh, here's another one by Joe Blogg's engineers, you know, that there's another adjudication they're involved with, or indeed litigation. And what came across, of course, in what you said, Mohammed, but also in Mark's conversation with us, is that there's a certain flexibility that CAP and conflict avoidance allows in terms of the outcomes. You know, that parties are not bound to a decision on an issue. You know, that in fact the outcome can be, well, that's what you're arguing about, but you can actually approach this in a different way and be innovative in terms of how you deal with that.
Sure.
An adjudicator can only adjudicate on what's in front of them, what's in the referral. That's the limits and the scope of the adjudicator's terms of reference. And the adjudicator can't bring to that dispute ideas and suggestions that their parties hadn't previously thought about, hadn't contemplated, you know, a much wider scope that can help them, you know, address that in a different way than they might have. I think that's something that really is coming across in the feedback that we're getting in terms of the support that parties are giving to something like CAP. Mark also mentioned legacy disputes, and there was one he dealt with in Scotland, which was a long-standing, intractable issue and dispute. And he talked about the difficulties of dealing with that, because in my view, the earlier you use conflict avoidance, the better. You know, if you use it as a conflict avoidance thing that manages to stop disputes, great. But people are humans after all, and you know, we can't agree on everything. So having something in place that can come in and help deal with an issue early before it escalates into something much worse and you get into adversarial confrontational mode. But I'd be interested in your views about you know, the extent to which something like a conflict avoidance process like CAP can actually deal with disputes that have been hanging around for a while. Do you have any views on that?
Oh, of course I do. Of course I do, because I mean,
tricky question, I know. I'm sorry.
No. See, it's one thing is if you can kind of run things through CAP simultaneously, okay, right from the beginning, that okay, these are the issues cropping up, and we are going to minimize them and go ahead smoothly. That's one thing. But I mean, imagine if a contract which has been entered into back in 2019 and started working, and then there's a COVID, and then we have some issues about time overruns and all these entitlements. So it's already been there for a while. But by all means, I'm not saying just because it's been there for a while, it's not amenable to CAP. The CAP, to me, even at a later stage where things have been there for a while, it gives the parties a good sort of understanding of what the issues are and where to find the answers are. And the beauty of it is that it's still it's still non-binding, so you don't feel forced to go by it, but the weightage of it is so high that you seriously look at it. And it's sometimes, in my experience, I've found, and I would say Andrew Miller QC is advocating that even within arbitrations, I've found it's not been very common practice early days, but Andrew Miller is continuously saying this should be the case, that arbitrators asking the parties to go away and try to find a solution, an answer through mediating of this particular issue, and then come back. Now, it's just taking a step ahead before going to the adversarial thing. If we take a step back, and if we involve the CAP, and if we bring in the expertise of someone like Mark, who the industry, I mean, if they don't know who he is, then that's their misfortune. But the industry understands that he doesn't have anything to win out of the outcome of a dispute. So they can easily be convinced that if he's saying that you are thin on this, there's no point going ahead, that must be a very, very good decision. And that's where you think, you know what, I will call it a day, and I will develop and continue with this relationship, because it's the time ahead is going to be difficult in maintaining a supply chain. So it's not always so easy, going to be so easy to have your contractors, the materials and everything on place. So if I be very picky and try to be dominating and thinking, go away, long ago, I will not name the body or the corporate. It was one of the most leading companies in the world, and I was negotiating with them and dispute to resolve. And the other side said, very big American law firms representatives, that you should understand that our position. And I said, you know what, I secretly recorded it. It's an abusive process. I'm going to go to outside and tell the journalists that what you are doing is abusing your dominant position. It's not something which happens once in 10 years. It happens quite regularly, but it is the CAP which can bring you down. And then if you are the boss, the CAP professional is even a bigger boss of the industry. So, and not to hammer on your head, but to make you understand where you are going wrong. It's somewhat hand-holding, which not possible in an adversarial scenario. Many a times you feel that one of the parties, they're missing the point, but your hands are tied. You cannot improve their representation. So that's how it's not always that it suits something, like it only has to be for the new couples. There could be an old couple and in serious disagreement over many things in their marital life, but still there is a process to bring them to the path of love for their old age as well. So it's and I am optimistic as well always. So yeah, that's what my view on it.
I love that. I love your optimism, and I think it's kind of infectious. But we're moving on to this last point, I think, and again, it goes to a conversation or subject that you and I have conversed about, and we've touched on it to an extent here, which is about the future of dispute resolution. I've been involved in dispute resolution for 30 years, as you know, but over the last 3-4 years, I've seen an immense change in attitudes and a growing appetite for the kind of thing we're talking about now, which is much more proactive engagement with parties and trying to resolve their issues rather than simply throw them into the pot that we call adjudication or litigation or arbitration. What views do you have on the future for dispute resolution? You're a professional. You're somebody who's going to be doing this for a while yet. So, where do you see the future going?
Well, the first thing is adding yet another kind of pathway. I don't think we'll see the demise of the other, because to a large extent, there are issues which still may be needed to be litigated or adjudicated. I mean, sometimes people say that, look, the construction arbitration domestic one has almost died because of this adjudication. This is a unique thing, and I don't think that just because there will be cap, there won't be adjudication. So that just because there is cap, there isn't going to be any mediation or anything like that. That will continue. However, what will happen better is people will come to the table of adjudication or process of adjudication with a better understanding of the dispute. And that better understanding is a neutral understanding from a very eminent expert of the industry, not from his own representative professional who's supposedly neutral, but he's not. He has an axe to grind as well. So he's got, every time you go to a delay claim, there are loads of program analysis and this and that and impact and this and that. And many of them are prospective, whereas you are talking about a claim which has been done, it's past. So the only thing you can do is retrospective and how it impacted. It doesn't matter which program has given what. If you have completed the thing by a day, then there's no opportunity that you'll be getting another extension of time. But many a times, even the commercial directors have seen. At the moment, I'm dealing with a loss and expense claim and an EOT. My other side is a very big company, and somehow the CEO. Up to him now, the file has gone, and he has taken the burden of all the responsibility of interacting with me. Even that, I want to understand this. Let's have a meeting. But it doesn't happen all the time that it's in that manner. But in that place where we have in CAP more and more used a neutral view, and an expert telling you that this is probably the thing, they are not going to be one-sided. And that's where the future of CAP lies. And also, like it or not, that's my feeling. I mean, others maybe and more experienced are thinking differently, but that's my feeling. That at one point or other, the professionals of all sorts will enter as representatives as well. And I do not think that that's a bad move either, because if we are thinking or trying to guide people to the right end, it could be with the right mindset. If the representative is an ADR mindset person, he will understand what to submit, or how to assist rather the neutral who's looking at it, as well as will be able to make his client or her client understand that this is the best option. So it gives them a leeway as well. So it's not that stop the gate and because I don't want professionals. Yes, we do not want the professionals who comes in even in an adjudication meeting and start saying that I want to cross-examine the person who has come on the other side. No, that's not a litigation. So we don't want them. Having said that, either if it's non-existent, then we should start trying to build conflict resolution advocates or conflict avoidance advocates. That's what I called myself. And I'm not a big name, but I'm still there. And if there are some, then try to develop a whole set of professionals like that. So that, I think, is the future.
I like what you're saying. I think I just add to that you know, the UK construction industry represents 10% of our gross GDP, our GDP. It's an important, hugely important, and it's becoming even more important now in terms of the socio-economic and political factors on a macro level. You know, the Brexit, the post-COVID environment, and how we recover from that. Huge infrastructure projects are already happening, like HS2, and we've seen also in the pipeline a number of others. And I think in order for those to be efficient and to be delivered on time and on budget and on par, there really does need to be an inclusivity in terms of embracing conflict avoidance, so that less money is spent on unnecessary dispute resolution, and that more money is spent actually getting the project off the ground and put into the pockets of the contractors and the people as that are doing the job. But I agree with you that, you know, there will be and still remain the need for formal procedures like adjudication, which has proven to be immensely effective in the UK for those issues that really do require it. I think what conflict avoidance and early intervention, particularly CAP, are about are addressing so many conflicts and issues that really don't need to escalate into those horrible procedures.
Sure.
And I think we must be drawing to a close or an end now. I think on our little session, are we? Is this going to an end?
I think so, yes.
Julie,
unless there are questions, of course, yes.
Well, unless there are questions, very happy to take questions. Before we do, I think
currently we have no questions. So unless if you have a question, anybody, please put it into the chat box or the Q&A box now, and the guys will be happy to answer for you. But it seems like you've satisfied everyone's curiosity, gentlemen.
Well, hopefully get them away.
Good job.
There's some. Anybody wants to see these? We only had a few short slides here just to cover the points we're talking about, but there's some contact details there as well if people really want to know more about CAP. And there we go. Okay.
Thank you very, very much, gentlemen, and also to Mark, even though he's disappeared from our screens as he had to go. But that was a really interesting session. As always, the contact details are available. If anyone wants to ask a question that they didn't want to ask in an open forum, they can contact either of you. Thank you for your time, Martin. It's always very much appreciated, and to you, Mo. And I think, Mo, we're back with you on Thursday evening, aren't we, for the latest in your adjudication matters? Yes, defending a claim. So we look forward to that. We have tomorrow for the morning seminar, I Want My Money Getting Paid, and that's with Richard Silver. So if anyone would like a place on that, please drop me an email, seminars@silverllp.com. Thank you again, gentlemen. Thank you to everyone who has turned up and logged in this evening. The next one in the series is July the 27th, when our panel will be looking at CAP from the user's perspective. And we'll obviously release some more information about that closer to the time. But again, if you'd like a place on that, email us seminars@silverllp.com. Okay, gentlemen, good evening. Thank you.
You're welcome, Julie.
Everyone else, good evening. It's always good to see you all.
Yes,
take care.
Thanks for all the attendees as well. Thank you
very much.